Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, along with my co-host, Dr. Nikki Robinson.
Hey, everybody.
Today, we're joined by Tom Pace. Tom, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. We're excited to chat with you and dive into all things firmware, IoT, and so on. But before we do, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Sorry if my voice is a bit raspy. I've been talking nonstop for the past week out at RSA. But so I'm Tom Pace. I'm the co-founder and CEO of NetRise. Started my career in the Marine Corps, doing not cybersecurity things. Then I went on to do some work at PNC Bank for a while, and then did industrial control system security at Department of Energy. Moved on from there to Cylance, where I handled a bunch of ransomware cases, oversaw our IoT firmware and embedded systems group, and then started this thing in December of 2020. So really happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. I've been following your work for a little while now, but for folks that don't know who NetRise is, can you tell us a little bit about the company and what you all focus on?
Yeah, so we are our initial vision and kind of like phase one, I guess, was providing visibility and risk identification to a set of devices that historically have had none, and those devices are generally known, thanks to Clarity's marketing team, as XIoT, Extended Internet of Things, which includes IoT, ICS, medical devices, vehicles, satellites, telecommunications equipment. And so what we wanted to be able to do was provide the same kind of visibility and risk identification that you can achieve on laptops, desktops, and servers with agents of these devices. And the only way to really do that is by analyzing the firmware. So building a automatic firmware analysis platform is where we started. And that is quickly evolving into essentially a supply chain risk management platform across all artifacts. So whether it's going to be a container or Windows or whatever, that is the way that this company is going. But we started off by focusing on the firmware analysis problem because we believed, A, it was the hardest problem, B, it is a woefully underserved part of the market due to its difficulty, and C, if we can do that right, being able to expand into these other markets that are significantly easier, just from a technical perspective, due to accessibility and well-established analysis techniques and things like that for containers and Windows, that would be advantageous for us. And so far that's proving out. So,
yeah, you actually kind of answered my question I was going to follow up with. So I'm going to follow up in a different direction. As you know, I recently finished up a book on software transparency and software supply chain, and it focuses heavily, as I was researching, reading, and citing things, it was heavily focused on enterprise IT, cloud, containers, and so on. Despite the proliferation of IoT and cyber physical systems, do you think that is an attack vector that we're overlooking when we look at the growth of IoT and, how it's going to be, I forget the exact numbers, but a several number of devices, per human on the planet, basically. Do you think that these kind of systems are something that we're overlooking?
Yeah. First off, congrats, man. I've never written a book, but I feel like that's like a massive undertaking. You wrote with Tony Turner, I believe, as well, who's a really, really good friend. So that's awesome. So yeah, it's what's really funny about this. If you've ever read the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perroth, which I think most of us probably have. When that book, when she talks to the gentleman from the NSA in the kind of first, attacks or whatever you want to call it, that they were going after, were embedding code into firmware, like in the 80s, because that's all that there was. There wasn't operating systems, like there wasn't, or they were very, very, early. And so what's funny to me is these devices are the first things that have been compromised. This is not like a new idea. This has been happening since the 80s. The challenge has been there is a wildly small number of people on the planet who have the ability to kind of peer inside of these devices and understand what's happening. And, I've said this many times. I feel like I had a pretty good handle on cybersecurity before I started this company. I mean, I've been doing it for a while, and I don't know, I've done a few things. I feel like I might as well have known nothing until I started this company, and just seeing the craziness that exists within all of these devices is almost like, how can this be the case that a enormous company has vulnerabilities that are like 15 years old on a device that like the Fortune 100 is using? Like, how can that be the case? But it is 100% the case. And so this idea that, like, you know, people are like, well, we don't know that if this is actually happening, you know, we don't know if we believe that. Well, yeah, of course you don't know if you can believe that, because you have no visibility. You can't, you're making a statement based on nothing. And so that's what we're out here trying to provide to people. And so.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So to sort of tease that out a little bit too, because, you know, talking about this sort of limited visibility and, like, you know, who's actually like working on this problem, right? I saw that you just announced the launch of Ethos, which is a bunch of organizations that are getting together to look at threat indicators, looking into emerging trends. Can you talk a little bit about how this idea came about, how you're all working together, and maybe what you're hoping to do?
Yeah. And I want to be clear about a couple of things. I think a few people reached out to me about that, or like, man, you guys like spearheaded this, great job. And I was like, I did not spearhead this. This was done by like an advocacy group that we were part of. That's kind of where the conversation started. You know, this like lobbying group that a lot of us are part of, us and Clarity and Tenable and Nozomi and all of that. And then Nozomi took the initiative here, frankly. This was like Danielle Jablansky over there has been just like an absolute rock star in terms of getting a lot of that done. And so the idea was, is there a way for us to basically share information across vendors that would be from our using our representative kind of technology and threat indicators that would be helpful for the community and industry as a whole? It's very similar to like an ISAC model, right? Where, you know, you're at, say it's the FS ISAC, and you have, you're at Wells Fargo and you received a phishing email. There's a pretty good chance that Bank of America and Chase received that same phishing email. So why don't we try and share that information in some way for the betterment of everyone? So that's what we're looking to do here. So if, you know, Clarity is deployed over in these networks, and Dragos is deployed over here in these networks, and Nozomi's over here, and we're identifying risks and vulnerabilities, how can we come up with a way for us to kind of share that information so that everybody benefits, without obviously sharing intellectual property and like all of the normal things you would not want to do to hurt your bottom line. So it just got, you know, formally launched. I'm the vice president on the board, which trust me, is not meaningful at all. So yeah, we're really excited about it. You know, we've had a number of conversations about this, and I think it's going to be a really cool thing, especially considering, you know, just the growth in the critical infrastructure security space. The people are really paying attention to this problem a lot more. So, you know, we're really excited about it, and that's kind of how it all got started and how it's going.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a quick follow-up question on that. You talked about, you know, information sharing between the firms that all play in that same space. We've heard a lot about information sharing and the role it can play in helping the ecosystem, you know, mitigate risk and so on. But as you point out, that there may be some firms reluctant to do that because maybe it's part of their value proposition, you know, their proprietary insight into the risk landscape or exploited vulnerabilities or so on. You know, any comments or thoughts on that topic? Because I've seen some of that in the vulnerability management space, for example, where companies may want to keep something because it's part of their value proposition. It's what makes them, you know, more compelling than a competitor, for example.
Oh yeah, I mean, we don't expect anybody, I mean, ourselves included, to, you know, share anything that's going to, you know, reduce our competitive edge in the market necessarily. But if it's, you know, if let me think of an example. Like if we know that, you know, a particular attack has occurred somewhere, and we can provide visibility into some of those open source components and the vulnerabilities therein, across a wide swath of different enterprises, like I'm probably going to be happy to do that, because what that's going to do for us, even just as a business, is put that data and indicator out there, give people visibility to it, and help them understand like, oh, okay, NetRise can provide this kind of visibility. Maybe I should be interested in, what they're doing from a commercial perspective as well. In a lot of these organizations, they have on-prem solutions and things like that. So data sharing has been very difficult just historically, especially these kind of critical infrastructure providers, just because that's been just a requirement for them. And frankly, and that's changing, and that's obviously good. So the more visibility we can provide here, I think is just going to benefit everyone.
Yeah, I like that too, because it is one of those things in like even incident response, right? The more you know, the more the information that you have available to you at that time, the easier it is to figure out what's actually going on and hopefully remediate or fix what's going on. So I like that a lot. So you have obviously a wealth of experience and knowledge in the XIoT space. Can you talk about some of the emerging trends, any of the threats that you're seeing, anything around this concern? And I talk about, the connectivity of devices too, this sort of sprawl of devices. So what are you seeing out there?
I think what's really interesting is the commonalities that you see across things that one would expect to be wildly different. We have customers in the medical device manufacturing space, the automotive manufacturing space, the defense space, both on like a DoD and like civilian agency side, IoT device manufacturers, telecommunications companies, and it's everyone's using the same things, and I don't think that that's real obvious to most people. It wasn't even necessarily obvious to me when I kind of like went down this road. And when you start looking at firmware at scale, you figure out that these are just computers. These are all running Linux file systems, at least from the majority of the market. You have real-time operating systems and Windows and other things also. But in terms of like the consistency you find across these things, and we do this thing where we can relate any given data point to everything else. So if you want to understand like, where is this open source component, like in anywhere else in your environment, and you just click a button, it'll show you all the devices. And it's really surprising when we do that. And it's like a Cisco router and a security camera and a printer and a badge card reader and an access point. And people are like, what, how is it on all of the, and it's just like, because these are all just running kind of the same thing. And so what that shows you is, and attackers have known this forever, they have this like one, choke point or whatever that they can target that gives them the ability to impact an entire, industry or device type or whatever it is. And that's a really interesting part that I don't think, people are really aware of. And in terms of, I guess, like the trends, you're just seeing people care about this in a really significant way. It's funny when people are like, man, you started this company, like you just knew the SBOM thing was going to take off. I'm like, SBOM didn't even exist when I started this company. So I'm not some SBOM oracle, trust me. I was, very involved with that when it all started. So that was great. But, things like SBOM have been a really significant driving force for us. Sorry, closing the window. So those are the kind of trends we see in terms of getting that visibility into those risks around even things like weak credentials and identifying private keys and all of those other things that people don't really associate with supply chain security a lot of times in SBOMs.
Yeah, on the SBOM topic, that was actually going to be a question I had for you coming up here is, we've seen a tremendous growth of SBOM Obviously, in the federal sector where I focus a lot, it's making its way into policy or even, federal acquisition regulation, things like that. The FDA, for example, is now, focusing heavily on it for medical devices. But for organizations or industries that it's not a requirement yet, how do you make the case to consumers on why they should have this, and then also make the case to suppliers on why they should provide it?
Yeah. So I have some strong opinions on this. So number one, since when is compliance and regulation the reason we do things? Like since when? That's a like crazy thing to me. That'd be like CrowdStrike wasn't successful because like the federal government said, thou shall have EDR. They were successful because they developed a technology that solved a problem. It's a really crazy concept. So whenever folks say things to me like, well, Tom, this isn't like a regulation. They don't have a reason to do this. I'm like, what do you mean they don't have a reason to do it? They don't have a reason to understand what software components are running on all of their devices that significantly outnumber their laptops, desktops, and servers. They don't have a reason to do that. What are you talking about? So we understand what exact process is running on Tom and accounting's laptop at any time. But I can't tell you if we're running open source components from 20 years ago on our edge routers. But we need compliance. We need a regulation for that. Like, what are we talking about? It's totally illogical. So that's my first comment. My second comment is the toothpaste is out of the tube. We have customers who have approached us because from a device manufacturer perspective, their customers have reached out to them and said, like, we're not asking you for an SBOM. Like, we're telling you that you're going to give us one. And there's no regulation, right? So that's happening. From an enterprise perspective, frankly, that's a more nascent market. It's a harder sale, I guess you would say. But it's the same thing. If you look at like the vulnerability, management, vulnerability scanner market, this is not what they do, right? They don't have the ability to identify these components using their technologies. It doesn't mean they're bad. They're excellent technologies, all of them. But they can't get the visibility into these devices because they don't have agents. They can't, it's just not possible. So if you're relying on those technologies to identify all of the risk and provide you all of the visibility on those devices, you're just not going to be able to get it. And so we're very complementary to those solutions, and we partner with a number of them and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, the regulation is only going to help us, obviously. But I don't think it is a requirement because it's already shown to not be necessary. It's just, I feel like there's a lot of folks trying to, put unnecessary hurdles in the way to achieve this goal. And listen, an SBOM is not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. I've never said that. I'll never say that. It's all, part of a broader defense in depth strategy. Are there challenges right now? Yeah. Like when firewalls came out, there were challenges with those too. We would drop packets and this would get blocked when it wasn't supposed to. And this didn't scale the way that vendors thought it would. So I guess we should just not even bother, right? So people are like, well, how do we disseminate this SBOM, Tom? Like, how do we manage it? Well, what if it's not complete? Like, what if it's not perfect? Yeah, because we only release technologies in cybersecurity that are 100% perfect from day one, right? I can't think of any cybersecurity technology that isn't perfect except SBOMs. And so it's just this thing where it's not going to be a requirement because it's already shown not to have to be one. But I look forward to it being one because it's going to be even more advantageous for us and all the other players in the space.
Yeah, I for one, personally appreciate those strong opinions because they align with mine too. I think the reason we're seeing a lot of the pushback is, some are afraid of the transparency that it's going to bring around the security and resiliency of their products, for example.
Sure.
And also, it's critical to address the information asymmetry between the suppliers and the consumers, in my opinion. So I wanted to ask you, and you brought something up. We talked a lot about IoT and the growth of IoT, and getting visibility and things like that. But ultimately, for a lot of the citizens, they don't have cybersecurity expertise. They're not software consumers in the enterprise context. We're seeing efforts around like IoT labeling and stuff. From NIST, and I think in the UK, the Cyber Resiliency Act talks about having to provide some kind of labeling or instruction to citizens to give them a feel for the security of a device they're purchasing. Any thoughts around like labeling efforts, things to provide citizens more informed, consumption opportunities, basically?
Yeah, I mean, once again, why would we not do that? That's always my question when it comes to these things. Like, give me the reason we shouldn't do it. So, I've given a number of talks where on one of the slides, I'll put, here are the things we have a bill of materials for. We have a hardware bill of materials, right? Like, what parts come on the car? That's like, if I go buy a car, I'm not a mechanic, right? I don't know anything about taking cars apart, but I know all the parts that are in the car I just bought. So I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not, I don't know, a food expert. But somehow we decided to put a list of ingredients in all the food that we buy. So why would we not do that? We talk about how critical software is, how important, how it's the foundation of our society, how it drives like our innovation it's what makes us, it's what makes us humans, to build our own tools and our own capabilities and drive progress forward, all of these things. And it's like, can you tell me what this thing is made of? And we're like, listen, we don't think we should do that. And it's like, it just doesn't align, right? And so same thing, like, is it going to be perfect? Is everyone going to understand what they are reading? Of course not, right? I mean, the ingredients analogy is just really the best analogy. It's a really good one. Like, you walk into the store and so sometimes you're looking at the ingredients list and you're like, you can't even pronounce half the words, which probably means maybe you shouldn't buy that thing, frankly. And so just giving people some level of visibility and transparency, I think, is good. And that'll iterate and that'll change over time. And maybe the first release will be way too detailed, and maybe the second one won't be detailed enough. But perfect is the enemy of good. And so, getting something done, and I don't know if it's a labeling guideline. I mean, I'm a fan of that. I do think that makes a lot of sense. But giving people more data to make decisions is just generally a good thing.
Yeah, no argument from me. And I often say the perfect is the enemy of good thing too, when people try to make this argument against it. It's also funny too, because like, things like software asset inventory have been a CIS or SANS critical control for like 2 decades. But when we talk about software components, everyone, whoa, it's like, it just doesn't make any damn sense.
Why do we spend, if everyone can tell you what critical security control number 1 is? Everyone. Asset inventory. Everyone can tell it to you, right? No one can tell you what number 2 is, which is software inventory, but everybody can tell you what like number 18 is. It's like, do you have an incident response plan? Okay, you do? Okay. Do you have antivirus installed? Okay, good. It's like, they just skip over number 2. It's like really fascinating. So yeah, I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, no argument. So I wanted to ask you, my last question for you is, like, I noticed you're also a veteran of the Marine Corps. As I was walking across, the RSA Expo floor and stuff, I noticed that, there's a lot of veterans in the cybersecurity community, for one, including myself. And, I wanted to ask, as a CEO now, a founder of a company and industry leader, how has your military service, served you in our cyber industry?
Well, I was in the Marine Corps from 2004 to 2008. A lot of times I get asked this question, like, how did you end up here, Tom? I was always going to do this. So I was a computer science, I left high school and went to college for a year as a computer science guy. And I dropped out when the war started. But I enlisted in the Marine Corps infantry. So it's not like I was this cyber ninja in the Marine Corps. I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and did some intelligence work and all that. But frankly, when I got out of the military in 2008, I don't, maybe someone has a different opinion. Tech and cybersecurity were not exactly these areas booming with veterans at the time. I think what the big change was Cyber Command in 2010. I think that was like a really big step, where a lot of people got involved. They created MOSs dedicated to cybersecurity. They created a career path in the military for that, and I think that has drove a lot of this, a lot of that change. Like my co-founder was also in the Marines, but he was like, he was in Cyber Command, so much more relevant experience. But yeah, I love it. I love seeing I love seeing the veteran population well represented in this community. We have a number of veterans that work at NetRise, which is super important to me. It makes me very happy. But yeah, I think it's great, especially given how generally underrepresented veterans are in this country. I mean, from a percentage of the population perspective, it's the smallest it's ever been. I think it's like under 1% or something like that, which is like the smallest minority population of like anyone in terms of like small business administration representation. So yeah, I think it's awesome. I think that's one of the big driving factors is cybersecurity started in the government, right? Like that's they kind of created it. So that's I think why that has been really attractive to a number of people coming out of the government or the military.
Yeah, it's I will say I've seen a lot more veterans, like even on LinkedIn, and people I've worked with that are getting into cybersecurity. And I think cybersecurity has grown so much too. There's so many more domains that you can get involved into. It's not just information assurance or compliance or, vulnerability management. It's, incident response, threat hunting, threat intel, like all these other areas that have expanded and given a lot of opportunities. So I think that's great. So to switch gears a little bit, I'm really curious, what is your favorite book, podcast, consumable media? What are you like either listening to or reading or looking at right now?
Yeah, I don't watch TV like at all. So I listen to a ton of podcasts. I really love just no big surprise, I don't think like the All In podcast right now is like incredible. That's so good. I've said this to a number of people. I've never consumed a piece of content, whether that's like a blog or a book or a podcast or something, that has taught me so much about a given like topic or set of topics than that podcast. I just think it's awesome. I sit there and I'm always like looking up. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So I think that's really good. I went down the normal founder path of reading every single founder and startup book known to man. So I do a lot of that still.
I see Chris nodding along.
Yeah, I mean, you can see they're all back there somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to do a better job of reading more for leisure. I'm probably failing on that front, doing anything for leisure these days. But I listen to that. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan podcast. Also, he has some great folks on. Let me see what I have over here on my. Here's the book I was reading on the way home. The Resilient Founder, which is actually wonderful. Written by Mahendra Ramsangani, who's one of our investors and just an awesome human in general. It's about just how difficult the founder journey is. And he talked to like over 100 founders. And it's one of those things where like everybody knows how difficult it is. And like these crazy ups and downs that people go through and like the emotional and even physical toll. It's a really kind of emotional book. They talk a lot about, even like suicide and things like that. And how it's just hard. And it's one of those things like everyone knows about it, but people are afraid to talk about it. So I really appreciate a book like that, kind of puts it out there. So yeah, those are the things, I'm consuming a lot right now. I'm really into documentaries and things like that as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. I struggle with the balance between, reading for leisure and reading for work or certifications or everything in between. But it is good to strike a balance sometimes. I do find that sometimes if I balance between like fun reading, like Lord of the Rings, something just like super fun and fantasy, it's like
Huge
a nice.
Lord of the Rings guy. Huge Lord of the Rings
Okay.
guy.
Okay. Cool. Well, you know what? Next time we'll do a Lord of the Rings podcast. We'll just go full tilt to.
Listen, now we are talking.
Okay.
Can we start a Lord of the Rings / cybersecurity podcast?
Yeah, I think that's the next idea.
Most popular podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, next up. We'll talk after that. Okay, so before I take us to our last question for you, I did want to ask, like, are you working on, what is going on at NetRise right now? Do you have any projects going on or anything big that you wanted to talk about that's coming up, going on now?
Well, we announced raising a round at RSA on Tuesday, which was a really incredible experience. I was frankly really nervous about how much visibility something like that would get at that conference. And basically nobody announced raising any money. So we got a whole lot of attention. I mean, it was like humbling. It was great. So that was very fun and exciting. We have a number of really huge initiatives and product roadmap items that we are working on, a couple of really big partnerships and other things like that we'll be probably announcing around Black Hat. In terms of for the next week or so, the entire company is flying to Austin on Monday for our all hands, which is always like it's like weird. It feels it's so amazing to have everyone in like one place and I don't know. I'm never going to get used to it, I don't think. So many of the people who work at this company are like really good friends of mine who I've worked with in the past, and it's just great. So that'll be pretty soul consuming this weekend, just making all the final preparations for that. But that's a labor of love for sure. So I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, so that's going to take us to our last question. We ask everybody, and I'm very interested in your take with your experience in XIoT and across threat intel and SBOMs. So what does cyber resiliency mean to you?
I think cyber resiliency to me is having the ability to, bend and not break, right? Having that flexibility in place is really important. And one of the key elements of being flexible is knowing and understanding what points in your strategy or whatever are able to have that more pull than the other, right? So, everyone has all of the normal kinds of solutions. And one of the big, ways to increase that resiliency is obviously, in my opinion, having visibility into things that maybe we didn't have visibility into before, right? Otherwise, where we are lacking in the visibility, you might break, which obviously eliminates that resiliency. So getting more visibility, being able to make data-driven decisions on things. There's a such thing as too much visibility. Like there's no doubt about it. You can have too much data. You can have too much noise. But having access to as much information as possible. And then if we figure out we need to reduce that in some way, that's fine. I'd rather have that problem though than have just no visibility. So without that, you don't know where to shore things up. you can't become more resilient without having more visibility. So that's what I think it means to me.
I like that, the way that you describe it, as it's not just, bend, not break, but knowing where you can bend and where you might break. Those are really important, I think, distinctions in understanding that whole surface. So huge thank you, Tom, for joining us this week. Was an absolute pleasure. We covered everything from XIoT to being a founder and everything in between. And then yeah, and Lord of the Rings. And we'll give you a call when we'll have the Lord of the Rings podcast. We'll have you back.
We have to dress in costumes. Otherwise,
oh
it just
yeah,
doesn't work.
yeah. Totally. Yeah. So thanks again, Tom. That's going to wrap us up for this week, and we'll see everybody next week.